You ever wake up to the sound of someone climbing your fence? Not a raccoon, not a lost kid chasing a ball, but a full-grown adult wearing a high-visibility vest and duct-taped tennis balls on her knees, trying to ninja crawl into your backyard like she's got a warrant signed by God himself. Because I have. And that morning, mouth half full of a cherry Pop-Tart, watching through the kitchen window, while Linda Witherspoon hoisted her leg over our privacy fence like some unholy blend of mall cop and mountain goat. I knew peace was no longer an option. This wasn't the first time, not even the third. It was just the latest chapter in what I would come to call, without any exaggeration, a suburban siege. But let me start at the beginning. Back when I was just a 14-year-old kid trying to get through the summer without parental supervision and without dying of boredom. My name's Max, and my parents had been assigned to a long-term engineering project overseas, with no one else around to babysit me except child services or my grandpa. Well, guess who got shipped in? Grandpa Joe, a retired military engineer with too many tools and not enough wars. He came with a shed full of blueprints, a temper like a pressure cooker, and a deep suspicion of any form of bureaucratic authority, which, in our neighborhood, came wrapped in pastel newsletters and smiley-faced fines, courtesy of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. He called them the clipboard cult. I called them annoying, but we were both wrong. They were something worse. They were invasive. At first, it was small stuff. Linda Witherspoon, head enforcer and self-appointed neighborhood overlord, marked our mailbox as an unapproved shade of red. It was cherry red. Cherry. Not neon, not offensive, just cheerful. Grandpa laughed it off, said she just needed to validate her existence that day. But then came the gnome incident. Grandpa loves garden gnomes. Not the cute kind either. His were custom-made, hand-painted, and strategically placed around our yard like little soldiers. There were gnomes with binoculars, gnomes with walkie-talkies, even one sitting in a wheelbarrow labeled Tactical Evac Unit. Linda sent a letter declaring them a decorative infestation. Grandpa sent her a photo of the gnome unit saluting the American flag. Still, things didn't truly get personal until the roses. It was a Saturday morning, quiet, sun bleeding over the rooftops, and Grandpa was on the porch swing with his coffee. I was inside, playing something loud and pixelated, when he burst in looking like he'd seen a ghost. She was inside the yard, he said, voice low and deadly, measuring the rose bushes. I blinked. Linda, with a tape measure, no doorbell, no knock, just in our garden like she owned it. I remember asking, stupidly, is that even allowed? And Grandpa just shook his head and muttered something about boundary override clauses and rogue bylaws. That was the day he stopped sketching birdhouses and started drawing blueprints on napkins. We didn't realize then that a battle line had been crossed. That Linda, armed with her clipboard and her HOA handbook, believed she had jurisdiction not just over lawns or hedge heights, but over people. That was her real power, not enforcement, but fear. Fear that if you didn't comply, you'd be fined, shamed, or worse, talked about in the group chat. And for most neighbors, that was enough. But not Grandpa. So when I say that morning, the Pop-Tart morning, and when I looked out and saw Linda mid-straddle on our fence, I wasn't surprised, but I was scared, because something had changed. Not in her, in him. She landed with a grunt, crouched like a crab in a traffic vest, and scuttled toward our side garden. She didn't notice the new birdhouse on the porch had a lens in it, didn't notice the strange little panel Grandpa had installed by the hydrangeas. And when the sprinkler activated, spraying her bee with a burst of blue-dyed mint water, it wasn't an accident. It was the opening shot. She screamed. She slipped. She went down in a blaze of clipboard and duct tape. Grandpa didn't even flinch. He just sipped his coffee and said, "That's the third time this week. She's asking for it." I stood there frozen, watching this woman scramble out of the begonias like she'd been through a Smurf explosion. And it occurred to me I wasn't witnessing a prank. This was something deeper. Personal, historic. Grandpa wasn't trying to win. He was trying to reclaim his porch, his dignity, his post-service purpose. Later that night, while we ate dinner, he declared the next phase. "We're electrifying the gate," he said, as calmly as someone might suggest buying more milk. I asked if that was legal. He didn't say yes. He said, "Only if you're dumb enough to touch it." The next day, the garage turned into a war lab. Blueprints on the walls, wires everywhere. Grandpa cackling while testing voltage regulators with an old watermelon. And me, I was caught between awe and terror. Because even though I knew he'd never really hurt anyone, I also knew Linda wouldn't stop. Not until someone drew a line in electric ink. That night, as we sat on the porch with folding chairs and night vision goggles, waiting, I asked him why he hated her so much. His answer stuck with me more than anything else. Because she walks into your yard like she paid for it, makes rules nobody voted for. And if you let people like that in, they don't just take your fence, they take your freedom. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I got it. Maybe for the first time, that this wasn't about garden gnomes or mailbox shades. It was about being allowed to exist in your own space without someone else's permission, about not being swallowed by a system that smiled while it squeezed you. And so, when she came again, dressed in black with a hoodie that said, "Rules keep us civil," clipboard strapped to her back like a quiver of bureaucratic arrows, we were ready. She crawled through bushes like a wannabe Navy SEAL and made it to the gate. When her hand hit the electrified ivy wire, the zap was soft. A tickle. Grandpa called it, but it was enough. Her body jerked. One shoe went flying. She fell like a puppet cut from strings. We watched it all in infrared glory. And as she limped away, muttering threats and dragging one leg like a cursed librarian, Grandpa didn't laugh. He just lifted his taco in silent salute. By morning, the video had gone viral. Someone in the neighborhood clipped it, added circus music, and titled it "Shock and LOL." It made the rounds first in the group chat, then local Facebook, then meme pages. Grandpa became a symbol, Porch General, they called him, and Linda, well, Linda became the punchline. But the funny thing is, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed, because even though it looked like we were winning, I knew the war had just started. I knew Linda wouldn't give up. That Paul Jenkins, the HOA president with his megaphone voice and a real estate ego the size of Texas, would step in. And when he did, it wouldn't be duct tape and sprinklers anymore. It'd be citations, legal letters, and threats in 12-point Times New Roman. So when I say I felt like a victim, it wasn't just because Linda trespassed. It was because she represented a machine smiling, self-justified, always polite, that could walk into your life, your garden, your sanctuary, and declare that you were in violation of what doesn't matter. The bylaws said so. And even now, looking back, even after the drones, the protests, the ridiculous, beautiful gnome revolution, I still remember that morning. Her leg on the fence, my Pop-Tart in hand. The moment I realized that a fence isn't just wooden nails, it's a line. And some people will cross it just to prove they can. But sometimes, just sometimes, that line fights back. The thing no one tells you about becoming an internet meme is that you don't get to choose the moment. It chooses you. You're not ready. You're not polished. You're just there, awkward, real, with your mouth half open and someone's ringtone playing circus music over footage of your neighbor face planting into your begonias. And suddenly you're trending. Not because you wanted attention, but because someone else couldn't mind their own business. That's how it felt for me. Watching Grandpa's electrified gate footage light up the local meme page, bounce to a Reddit thread, and then swirl into the chaotic cyclone that is TikTok. I didn't even know who posted the video first. Maybe Cam, our neighbor, who always seemed to have a camera ready. Maybe someone from across the street who just thought it was funny. But by the end of that week, it had over 300,000 views and a comment section that looked like a roast battle at summer camp. Grandpa was dubbed Gate Grandpa. Oh, Linda was Karen of the fence, and me, I was the silent sidekick in every screenshot, frozen in the background with a look of stunned horror. I was Max, the kid with a front row seat to suburban warfare. At first, it was funny. I mean, we laughed. Grandpa especially. He even printed out one of the memes and taped it to the fridge. The one where Linda's airborne foot is mid-swing and someone added the caption, "When you try to enforce bylaws but forget gravity exists." But it didn't stay funny for long, because when the HOA realized their enforcer had gone viral, soaked, humiliated, and electrified, they didn't just get mad, they mobilized. Not with apologies, with retaliation. The cease and desist letters came 2 days later. delivered in an envelope so stiff and formal it looked like it had been ironed. Grandpa read it out loud in his best dramatic British accent, flipping bacon on the skillet as he went. It accused him of using unauthorized deterrent devices, warned of community endangerment, and demanded the immediate removal of all offensive installations. I stared at him across the breakfast table. "Are we going to stop?" I asked. "Not unless they spelled deterrent correctly," he said, chewing his toast. That was the moment I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Grandpa renamed the garage command center and added a laminated sign that said "so." He installed a whiteboard, drew flowcharts, tested voltage, and rewatched the gate footage like a football coach analyzing a defensive play. I helped, sort of. I fetched tools. I rewound video clips. I Googled things like, are prank deterrents technically illegal, and can HOA fine you for being funny? The answers weren't helpful. Meanwhile, the neighborhood transformed. People started picking sides. Some thought Grandpa was a hero. Others whispered that he'd gone too far. But the real escalation came not from gossip, but from the sky. It started one night with a strange hum. Not loud, more like a mosquito with bad intentions. I peeked out the window and saw it small, hovering, with red lights blinking like angry eyes. A drone. At first, I thought it was a toy. Then I saw the sticker on the side property of Willow Creek HOA surveillance. I didn't even know that was legal. I ran to tell Grandpa. He didn't even look surprised. "They're escalating," he muttered. "Time for phase 3. He didn't elaborate, just went into the garage and stayed there until past midnight. The next morning, something new sat on the workbench. A contraption made of an old garden gnome, a leaf blower, a GoPro, and more wires than I thought necessary. "Meet Gerald," Grandpa said, patting it like a pet. "He's our counter drone." I blinked. "You built a drone-fighting gnome." He nodded. "With light-based harassment capability, fully solar-powered, and he plays Beethoven." I didn't ask why Beethoven. I'd learned not to question the logic of someone who once turned a pool noodle into a perimeter alarm. Gerald was programmed to track the HOA drone and flash intense bursts of LED light to blind its camera. He also wore a tiny helmet and had a speaker that played motivational sound bites. Grandpa recorded them himself. Things like "respect the boundary," "Brenda," and "hover again, and I'll plant more gnomes." The first night we deployed Gerald, it felt like launching a satellite. We sat on the porch, him with a tablet, me holding a flashlight like some budget NASA tech. The drone arrived just after sunset, buzzing above the hedges like it was casing a bank. Gerald lit up. Literally, He zipped across the yard, clumsily but determined, and chased the drone with the fury of a tiny plastic vigilante. It was beautiful. 8 minutes of chaotic, glowing ballet. The drone fled. Gerald returned. Mission complete. We ate celebratory cookies. But HOA wasn't done. They sent more drones, sleeker, faster, with better cameras and AI tracking. One even tried to knock Gerald over mid-patrol. It felt personal, like the HOA was saying, "Oh, you want war? Let's see how cute your little toys are now." Grandpa didn't flinch. He adjusted Gerald's programming, added a second LED cannon, and mounted a mirror to reflect surveillance lasers. I swear I heard him muttering Latin as he did it, like some sort of backyard wizard preparing for Droneageddon. But it wasn't just gadgets. It was culture. Grandpa had become more than a man with wires and gnomes. He was an idea. People began sneaking extra gnomes into their yards. Some were subtle, a chef here, a fisherman there. Others went full rebellion. A gnome army appeared on the Andersons' lawn overnight. One kid down the street made a cardboard tank with a gnome inside. We were no longer just defending a porch. We were defending a movement. Meanwhile, HOA doubled down. They issued fines for unregistered lawn figures, threatened yard occupancy violations. They banned porch rocking chairs for disruptive optics. Yes, really, disruptive optics. Grandpa laughed, but I could tell the pressure was mounting. He stayed up later, drank more tea, talked less. He wasn't just fighting Linda anymore. He was staring down an entire system. One morning, a man in a suit delivered another envelope. This one bore the seal of the Regional Homeowners Oversight Board. I didn't even know that was a thing. The letter accused us of operating a surveillance disruption unit without a municipal permit and refusing compliance through flagrant whimsy. That last part felt personal. They were calling Gerald whimsical. It wasn't just ridiculous, it was insulting. That night, Grandpa didn't build, he just sat on the porch, Gerald beside him, and watched the stars. I sat next to him. We didn't say much. Eventually, I asked, "Are we still winning?" He smiled faintly. "It's not about winning," he said. "It's about making them blink first." And then, as if summoned by the challenge, the drone returned. Only this time, it hovered, then descended, dropped a tiny box on our lawn. Inside, we found a miniature gnome holding a flag that said, "Compliance through unity." It was both a threat and a peace offering. Grandpa stared at it for a long time. Then he picked it up, dusted it off, and placed it beside Gerald. "Let them send gifts," he said. "We're just getting started." And as the porch light flickered in the background and the wind stirred the chimes Linda once called aggressively whimsical, I realized something terrifying and wonderful. The war wasn't cooling down. It was evolving. And somehow we had become its reluctant leaders. You'd think after drones, fines, surveillance threats, and a regional oversight board trying to regulate the expression of garden gnome freedom, things would slow down. Maybe people would take a breath, return to lawn trimming and Sunday potlucks. But that's not how Willow Creek works. Not anymore. Because in war, especially the quiet, ridiculous kind, where front lines are picket fences and weapons come with googly eyes, escalation doesn't pause. It mutates. And sometimes it mutates into a legend. It started the morning after the HOA dropped the compliance gnome, a peace offering, or perhaps an insult in ceramic form. We didn't retaliate. Grandpa set it beside Gerald on the porch, said nothing, and went back to tuning the oscillation sensors. But something shifted. A signal, perhaps, or maybe a whisper carried on the wind that said, "This isn't just your fight anymore." That whisper reached Mrs. Patel across the street, who, without saying a word, placed a gnome by her mailbox. A simple one, smiling, holding a tiny frying pan, no politics, no protest. Just there. By noon, the Andersons had added 3 more. One on a tire swing, one golfing, one inexplicably dressed as Elvis. By the end of the day, it was as if the neighborhood had been invaded by a very short, very cheerful army. I watched it unfold like a dream, subtle at first, then snowballing. Some neighbors chose silence, letting their gnomes speak. Others were louder. Cam started a parody trailer titled Gnomageddon Rise of the Porch King and cast Grandpa as the lead. The video racked up hundreds of thousands of views within hours. Grandpa didn't even blink when Cam showed him the final cut. Just nodded and said, "The editing could use more attention." But not everyone was thrilled. Paul Jenkins, the HOA president, clipboard commander, bureaucratic warlord, was spiraling. I saw him stomping up driveways, red-faced and waving citations like they were eviction notices. Mrs. Patel was fined $75 for unregistered lawn figures. Cam got hit with a $204 penalty for display clustering. One woman, whose gnome held a coffee cup labeled HOA Tears, received a cease and desist letter that claimed she was inciting rebellion via yard decor. Paul called it gnome-based insubordination. Grandpa stayed quiet through all of it. No new traps, no public declarations, just silent observation, watching, waiting, planning. I could see it in his eyes like he was drawing mental maps, counting loyalties, gauging wind direction in case a potato cannon needed trajectory calibration. The silence only broke once. Late one night when I brought him tea, he looked up from the porch swing, nodded toward Gerald, and whispered, "Soon." He didn't need to say more. I understood. The HOA wasn't going to back down, and neither were we. 3 days later, things reached critical absurdity. Paul Jenkins showed up at our front door, or first bar, at exactly 3:04 p.m., sweating through his pastel button-up and clutching a manila folder like it was a death warrant. He didn't knock, just started shouting, "Montgomery, I've got it this time, you're done." Grandpa didn't answer right away. He stepped out slowly, arms folded, eyes calm like the eye of a very sarcastic storm. Paul shoved the folder forward. "You violated Article 14, Section B, intentional incitement of noncompliance. Effective immediately. Your property is to be designated a zone of restriction. No more yard installations, no visitors, no porch presence. That includes rocking chairs and passive commentary. I stepped forward before I even realized what I was doing. That's not a real rule, I said. It is now, Paul barked. Emergency bylaws ratified this morning by unanimous vote. Grandpa tilted his head. You're the only one on the board. Paul smiled like a villain who just got caught in a Scooby-Doo trap. Exactly. Efficiency. And that's when it happened. Not an explosion, not a fight, something stranger. Doors creaked open. Neighbors stepped out, slowly, silently, one by one. Some holding gnomes, some just standing still. And then Mrs. Patel crossed the street, placed her gnome at our feet, and stepped back. Cam followed, carrying a gnome in a wheelchair with a sign that read, "Justice for Gerald." Others joined, dozens, hundreds. It wasn't loud, no chants, no shouting, just presence. Paul looked around, spinning slowly like a man who had suddenly realized the town hall had turned into a trial. "You're all breaking rules," he shouted. Someone from the back muttered, "Maybe it's time to change the rules." Another voice, louder this time, called, "You're finished, Jenkins," and then the final blow. Mr. Dupree, retired, soft-spoken, always in a fishing hat. He walked right up to Paul and handed him a single sheet of paper. Paul read it, blinked. "What is this?" he croaked. "A petition." Mr. Dupree said, "To remove you from the board." Paul's face turned the color of undercooked cranberry sauce. "You can't do that." "I built this HOA. Then maybe it's time we renovate," Grandpa said, stepping forward at last. Paul tried to speak again, but no one was listening. Even Linda, freshly returned and dramatically over-accessorized in her neck brace and orthopedic shoes, took one look at the crowd and slowly retreated into her Prius. The next morning, Paul was gone. No note, no message. Just a bare lawn where his HOA proud flag used to wave, and a few crushed rose petals where one of his drones had crash-landed weeks before. Someone claimed they saw him on a TV show about disgraced local officials. Others said Florida or Idaho, but it didn't matter. He was out. And with his departure, the storm broke. The HOA wasn't dissolved. It reformed, rebuilt, run now by a rotating committee of actual residents, people who talk more than they cited. The drone program was scrapped. The gnome ban lifted. Gerald got a tinfoil medal and a custom pedestal with a plaque that read, "Defender of the Free Yard." Grandpa didn't celebrate, not loudly. He just sat in his usual chair, sipping his usual coffee, nodding at neighbors as they passed. When I asked him how it felt to win, he didn't answer right away. Then he muttered, "It's not about winning. It's about making sure people remember they're allowed to be weird." That line stuck with me. Like the kind of thing you'd write in a yearbook if your school was overrun by HOA enforcers and you fought back with potato cannons and gnome resistance. And that's when something even stranger happened. A little kid, maybe 7 or 8, walked up our porch steps. He held a gnome in both hands, one with sunglasses and headphones. He looked up at Grandpa and said, "My dad said, you're the reason I get to keep this." Grandpa blinked, took the gnome gently, looked at it like it was a message written in clay. "Tell your dad," he said softly. "He's got good taste in rebellion." And just like that, the porch didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like home, the kind where you sit and rock, and maybe, if necessary, defend your garden with a robotic lawn gnome named Gerald and a family-sized bag of tactical resolve. If there's one thing I've learned about battles, it's that the loudest moment isn't when things explode, it's right after the dust settles and you realize nothing will ever be the same. That realization came to me somewhere between Mrs. Patel's third gnome deployment and the day Grandpa stapled a tiny American flag to Gerald's torso. We weren't just defending a yard anymore. We were holding the line for every flamingo owner, wind chime enthusiast, and mailbox painter in Willow Creek. The HOA didn't just lose its grip, it lost its mind. And while Paul Jenkins quietly disappeared into the rumor-swirling abyss of exile, what emerged in his absence wasn't peace. It was transformation. It was, well, kind of beautiful. For about 5 minutes. Then the drones came back. They weren't the same kind either. These were newer, sleek, angular. Definitely not the off-the-shelf models you buy at a big box store. One hovered outside our porch for nearly 15 minutes without moving. It didn't record, it watched. That was somehow worse. It didn't make noise, didn't flash, just hung there like a metal mosquito filled with judgment. Grandpa didn't engage right away. He just sat there sipping his coffee. Gerald by his side, eyes fixed on the thing like a retired general watching enemy scouts. But I could tell it was eating at him. That night, he barely touched his mashed potatoes. And when he did speak, he said, "They're not done." Someone pulled strings. The next morning, the envelope arrived. Unlike the previous HOA threats that came folded and smug, this one was different. It was thick, hand-delivered by a man in a gray suit who didn't speak, didn't smile, just handed it over like he was passing off bad news from a king. The letterhead read Regional Suburban Standards Enforcement Division. It accused Grandpa of the unauthorized counter-surveillance practices, psychological interference, and municipal morale disruption. I didn't even know what that last one meant. Was it illegal to make people feel too free? Grandpa read it, then set it on fire using a magnifying glass in the afternoon sun. "That's a first," he said, burning bureaucracy with daylight. But he wasn't laughing. The neighborhood, however, was electrified. Word of Paul's exile had spread, and with it, a cautious optimism. Neighbors who once peeked through blinds now waved openly. Kids biked by and high-fived Gerald like he was a mascot. Cam started selling t-shirts with Grandpa's face over a gnome silhouette that read "Respect the Fence." We even caught someone putting fairy lights around their gnome army and blasting Bon Jovi out their window like it was Liberation Day. But beneath the joy, I felt the unease curling under our steps. It wasn't just about drones, it was about something worse: silence, a new kind of pressure, like the eye of a storm we'd already named but hadn't escaped. Then came the patrol cars. Two black SUVs parked at the end of our street. No sirens, no uniforms, just parked there like predators, unsure whether their prey was worth the effort. I saw Grandpa watching them through binoculars he hadn't used since Linda's early incursions. "Not HOA," he muttered. "Something bigger. They're wearing suits, not polo shirts." I swallowed hard. Should we be worried if they bring clipboards? Yes. That night, Grandpa started building again. But it wasn't weapons, not traps. It was something else: quiet mechanisms, strange aluminum frames, a system of angled mirrors and rotating base plates. I finally asked, "What is it?" He didn't look up. Deterrence by absurdity. And I understood. We'd reached a point where logic wasn't enough. You don't beat systems like this by playing their game. You beat them by breaking the board. 3 days later, the first official inspection team arrived. They wore polos with a gold HOA emblem stitched into the chest, updated branding. I assumed and carried digital tablets and measuring devices. They claimed they were doing post-leadership restoration checks, which is a fancy way of saying they were here to take revenge with tape measures. Grandpa greeted them with lemonade and a recording of bagpipes playing from a hollowed-out lawn flamingo. They asked to scan Gerald. He said only if he consents. They didn't like that. They fined us $311 for excessive creative landscaping, another $144 for improper porch seating arrangement, and my personal favorite, $89 for ornamental political ambiguity. That one was apparently triggered by a garden gnome holding both a peace sign and a tiny protest sign that read, "No Mo, no Masters." Grandpa framed the citation and labeled it artistic achievement in civil disobedience. But the drones returned in swarms. We counted 5 the next night, hovering in formation. They scanned. They circled. One dropped a note tied to a small parachute that read, "Cease all decorative operations." Another drone used a speaker to play what I can only describe as bureaucratic ASMR, a calm female voice reading HOA bylaws over soft harp music. It would have been funny if it hadn't felt so calculated, like they were trying to wear us down, make us doubt, make us comply. Grandpa didn't crack. He adapted. He built Gerald a partner. A slightly taller gnome named Harriet, designed to project holograms and emit low-frequency noises specifically tuned to disrupt drone sensors. He tested them nightly. The lawn looked like a science fair sponsored by revolutionaries. The neighbors watched with awe. Some started building their own units. There were gnomes on skateboards, gnomes in treehouses, gnomes holding QR codes that linked to protest playlists. It wasn't just us anymore. It was all of Willow Creek. And that's when the signs started appearing. Official looking, laminated, zip-tied to fences and light poles. Messages like drone-free zones for approved personnel only. All surveillance must be HOA certified, and unauthorized observation will be prosecuted. One even read silence is compliance, which felt like something lifted straight from a dystopian handbook. It was subtle, sure, but the message was loud. They weren't just trying to punish us now. They were trying to make us question what was ours. Our yards, our porches, our choices, and in that haze of power plays and paranoia, I started to feel it again. That same nervous weight I felt the first day Linda climbed the fence. The fear that maybe we were pushing too hard, that maybe the price of rebellion was isolation. But then I saw it 3 houses down. A gnome made of recycled soda cans, ugly, clunky, perfect. A kid had built it with Hana's mom. They named it Clank. It didn't blink. It didn't flash, but it stood there, unbothered, defiantly useless. And somehow, that made it stronger than any sensor-packed device we'd built. I told Grandpa about it that night. He didn't smile. He just nodded and said, even when they erase the map, people still find their way to the line. I didn't get it then. Not fully, but I do now. Because that's the truth they were afraid of. Not just resistance, but resonance. That one spark of defiance might not burn anything down, but enough sparks light a street, a block, a town, a movement, and maybe, just maybe, a porch. Some revolutions are quiet. Ours was not. Ours began with ceramic gnomes and ended with a town meeting so tense. Even the lemonade tasted like passive aggression. But in between the viral drone footage, the regional oversight threats, and the absurd citations for ornamental ambiguity, something bigger was happening. The neighborhood was changing, and for a moment it felt like we were winning. The patrol drones had become less frequent, or maybe just sneakier. Harriet, Gerald's LED-enhanced partner, stood guard on the porch like a loyal, bug-eyed sentinel. Her motion sensors now fine-tuned to the sound frequency of HOA-issued quadcopters. Our porch became less of a battleground and more of a landmark. People started taking selfies with Gerald. Tourists not even joking. Actual tourists showed up asking, is this where the Electrified gate video happened? Grandpa installed a little visitor's plaque and added a guest book no one used. But then came the letter. Not a fine, not a cease and desist, not a laminated HOA threat stapled to the gate. No, this one came from the outside world. A letter from a late-night show in New York. An actual talk show. Glossy, full color, gold-embossed envelope. Dear Mr. Montgomery and Max. It read, we would love to invite you to appear as guests on our program. Your story has captivated the nation, a tale of modern rebellion, intergenerational unity, and whimsical resistance. Grandpa squinted at the invitation like it might explode. You think this is a trap, he asked? No, I said, but if it is, I hope Linda shows up in another neck brace. He grunted, the closest thing he had to a laugh when he didn't trust something. After some debate, most of which involved figuring out how to explain Gerald to TSA, he agreed. On one condition. He said, Gerald comes too. The airport experience was a disaster. TSA scanned Gerald 3 times. When he asked if the gnome was weaponized, Grandpa said, only philosophically. That did not help. At one point, they pulled me aside and asked if I was being coerced. Define coerced, I said. The show itself was surreal. Bright lights, a too-friendly host, audience laughter cued with robotic precision. But what stuck with me wasn't the interviews or the jokes. It was Grandpa, sitting on that couch, staring dead into the camera, and saying I was minding my business. And then some clipboard crusader decided to treat my fence like a jungle gym. The crowd roared. I saw people in the back stand up, cheering, whistling. One guy held up a cardboard sign that said, defend your porch. It was the strangest thing. For years, we were told to be quiet, to comply, to respect the invisible boundaries of suburban order. And now Grandpa was being applauded for drawing an electrified line and daring someone to cross it. When the segment aired, it went viral again. Meme pages exploded. A subreddit called Freedom Gnomes popped up. Someone made an animated reenactment of Linda falling into the birdbath using Minecraft characters. There was even a TikTok remix of Grandpa's porch monologue auto-tuned and set to dubstep. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Then came the mural. Someone still unknown painted a massive image on the side of the community center. It showed Grandpa in full heroic pose, standing among a sea of gnomes and roses, arms folded, gaze defiant. Above him, "Defend your yard." It wasn't just graffiti, it was tribute. Cam started selling prints online and donated half the proceeds to a veterans support organization. Grandpa rolled his eyes but didn't stop him. "If they're gonna make me a cartoon," he said, "at least they're using decent paper." But just when things seemed to settle, the silence cracked. Linda returned. Not in person, she hadn't been seen since the HOA coup, but in spirit, through a document slipped under our door late one night. No envelope, just a single typed page that read HOA 2.0. "Compliance will resume." At first, we thought it was a prank. Cam swore he didn't do it. Mrs. Patel swore on her frying pan gnome it wasn't her, but then other neighbors received them too. Identical font, same wording. No explanation, just a warning. The next day, signs began to appear. Porch presence review, pending, drone-free zone suspended. Decorative installations must be reapproved, all unbranded, all unsigned, but all unmistakably HOA coded. Grandpa read the signs, then stood on the porch for an hour without speaking, just watching, like he was waiting to be sure it wasn't a hallucination. Then he nodded once and said, "We're not done." He went back into the garage. This time he didn't build. He wrote a letter, a speech, a declaration. We posted it to the community board and online. It read, "If HOA 2.0 wants to rise, they better be ready to meet GNOME 3.0. We don't need bylaws to respect each other. We need boundaries that mean something, and porches we can stand on without fear. If they come again, we'll be waiting with spotlights, solar panels, and solidarity." I thought it might get ignored, but the next morning, our mailbox was filled with notes. Handwritten, printed, folded napkins. Even. One read, "My mom cried watching the talk show. Thank you." Another said, "I installed a gnome cam. HOA be damned." A kid from 2 blocks over taped a drawing to our fence. It was Gerald flying like Iron Man, lasers shooting out of his eyes, Linda fleeing in the background. That same week, someone launched a website, porchdefense.net. It listed resources for tactical lawn freedom, included 3D printable gnome armor, and offered lawn signs that said, "Not today, HOA." But none of it prepared us for what happened next. The return of Linda wasn't announced. It was felt. A tremor. A shift. Like someone had turned the thermostat of the neighborhood to uncomfortable. Cars started driving slower. Clipboard silhouettes seen in windows. A shadow outside our side gate. And then, one night, a figure moved through our yard. Not a drone. A person. Dressed in dark clothes. Ducking. Sneaking. They didn't climb the fence this time. They picked the lock on the side gate. Gerald triggered the motion sensor. Lights snapped on. Sirens wailed. A pre-recorded message began blaring through porch speakers. "You are being recorded for the Porch Defense Archives. Please explain your presence to the gnome in charge." The figure ran, but not before Cam's camera, permanently aimed at our lawn, now caught a glimpse. It was blurry, but the posture, the bag, the outline of a clipboard, it was her, Linda, back in the shadows, trying not to fall into a birdbath this time. Grandpa didn't say anything. He just pulled the garden hose tighter around the motion turret, then added a second decoy Gerald to the driveway. "If they want psychological warfare," he murmured, "I can play chess too." And somewhere in the distance, a wind chime one Linda had once called a weapon of dissonance sang quietly in the night air. It wasn't over. It never really had been. But now we weren't the victims anymore. We were the weird ones, the stubborn ones, the porch defenders. And if Linda wanted her clipboard thrown back, she'd have to cross the lawn of legends to get it. Peace, when it finally came to Willow Creek, didn't arrive like a grand parade or some final declaration with trumpet fanfare and confetti. It came quietly, like the last flicker of a storm rolling off into the distance, barely noticed, yet deeply felt. The porch was still. Gerald's lights dimmed for the first time in weeks, now more ceremonial than tactical. The wind spinner, once declared aggressively whimsical by Linda herself, spun lazily in the morning breeze. For the first time in what felt like forever, no drones hovered above us, no letters taped to the gate, no surveillance vans parked at the end of the cul-de-sac pretending to check for raccoons, just the creak of Grandpa's rocking chair and the faint scent of burnt toast drifting from the kitchen. Still, I waited. I kept expecting the other shoe to drop the HOA too. Zero comeback, the clipboard brigades, or maybe Linda herself rappelling from a nearby pine tree with bylaws in hand. But nothing came. The silence wasn't empty. It was earned. Grandpa didn't announce a victory. He didn't throw a party or release a final video titled Porch General Wins the War. He just kept sitting on the porch, polishing Gerald's helmet with a cloth that smelled vaguely of peppermint oil and defiance. There was a new plaque on Gerald's pedestal now. Someone had welded it professionally, not some DIY attempt. It read, Defender of the Free Yard. No one admitted to installing it. It just appeared one morning. Like the town itself had started whispering its gratitude. Kids biked past with walkie-talkies tuned to imaginary frequencies. One group wore matching shirts that said, Stay off the grass or else. And every few days, someone left a gift on the porch. Cookies, a thank you note. A small ceramic figurine, painted to look like Gerald's cousin. One little girl dropped off a flamingo-shaped pin that blinked when it sensed movement. Grandpa installed it on the mailbox. As for the HOA, what remained of it had undergone what the adults called structural reform and what Grandpa called a much-needed lobotomy. The board was now elected, not self-appointed. Fines had to be publicly voted on. Surveillance drones were banned unless approved by the full community. And decorative wide yard items, once tightly regulated by seasonal color codes, were now permitted within reason. Define reason, Grandpa had asked at the first new town hall meeting. Someone shouted back, No flamingos taller than a mailbox. Grandpa accepted that. Barely. The strangest part wasn't that the rules changed. It was that people did. The neighbors, once afraid of side glances and mailbox tattling, began talking to each other again. Cam started hosting backyard film nights. Mrs. Patel taught a gnome painting class. Even old Mr. Dupree, the man who once refused to wave, built a miniature gnome barbershop quartet in his front yard, complete with tiny bow ties and a Bluetooth speaker that played Sinatra. For a town once paralyzed by politeness and petty authority, it felt like a different world. And yet, something in Grandpa didn't settle completely. He wasn't paranoid exactly, just ready on like a soldier who knows peace is temporary. One afternoon, while I was scrolling through my phone on the porch, I caught him adjusting Gerald's bass again, checking the solar panel connections, recalibrating the motion sensors. Why, I asked, they're gone. He didn't look up. That's what they want you to think. I rolled my eyes, but part of me understood. We'd seen how fast rules could weaponize, how easily power can be disguised as concern, and how quickly a fence can stop being a boundary and become a test. I didn't expect what came next, a letter, but not from the HOA. This one came from somewhere entirely different, a tech institute, one of those fancy camps where kids go to build robots, code apps, and invent things that end up on Shark Tank. I opened it thinking it was junk mail, then saw my name printed in block letters, a full scholarship. Someone no name given had read the blog post I'd written about everything the war, the drones, Gerald, even Linda's last silent retreat. It had been meant as a school assignment, but I guess someone shared it, someone who mattered. I showed Grandpa. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a screwdriver and said, You'll need better tools than this. Then, after a long pause, added, Max, you built a surveillance-resistant gnome with a leaf blower and duct tape. If they didn't offer you a scholarship, I'd question the entire education system. I laughed, mostly because I was too stunned to do anything else. I had built Gerald, sort of. I mean, Grandpa did the heavy lifting, but I helped. I learned. I kept him running. I made the upgrades. And maybe somewhere along the way, I became more than just the sidekick in the background of a viral video. We didn't tell many people, just the neighbors closest to us. But somehow, word spread. At the next community meeting, they surprised me. Cam played a slideshow photos of Gerald in action, blurry footage of me sprinting across the yard holding a toolbox, freeze frames from the viral videos. Someone baked cupcakes shaped like miniature gnomes, Mrs. Patel gave me a keychain shaped like a miniature gate with the initials MG carved into it. Max and Gerald. She said, "You were always the real dream team." And then Grandpa, without standing, just nodded at me. "The porch is always here," he said, "but the world's bigger. Go build something dumb somewhere else." When the day came to leave for camp, I packed light, clothes, gear, my laptop, but I couldn't leave Gerald. Not entirely. So I printed a photo of him full color, battle-ready pose, and taped it inside my suitcase. A reminder that resistance could be hilarious, that defense could be joyful, and that sometimes standing your ground means knowing when to leave it. The morning I left, the porch felt different. Not sad, just always complete. As if the final scene had been written. Grandpa didn't say much. He never did. Just handed me a folded napkin with a note scribbled on it. "If they make you take a test, remember fences should keep people safe, not boxed in." Then he slapped a "Defend Your Yard" sticker on my backpack and sent me off like he was launching a missile made of nerd. And yet, even after I got to camp, met the other students, and plugged into a world where kids spoke in code and built drones on purpose, part of me still lived on that porch. I checked the porch cam every night, watched the neighbors, counted the new gnomes, and every time I saw Gerald in the corner of the screen, lights dimmed but posture proud, I knew it hadn't been a waste. None of it. The jokes, the arguments, the battles over mailbox color. It all meant something. We'd carved out a little patch of rebellion in a neighborhood that once fined you for creative hanging baskets. We made space, not just for us, but for everyone who needed to be reminded that dignity doesn't come with a permit. A few weeks later, I got a letter, not from the HOA, not from the camp, from the kid who had once placed a flamingo pin on our porch. "My dad says we can paint the fence now." It read, "He said he was scared before, but now he's not. Because of you." I read that line 5 times, and suddenly, I didn't feel like a kid with a strange summer anymore. I felt like someone who'd helped build something real, something lasting. And when I called Grandpa to tell him, he didn't say much, just laughed quietly, then said, "Good, just wait till they meet Gnome 4.0.